everyone, and welcome to another episode of Coast to Coast to Coast to Coast Connections this time. I'm Elizabeth Hines, and it's my pleasure to bring you the Holmes family from Comox, who did an epic 14-month sailing adventures with their two young daughters, crossing the Atlantic twice with young children. They're going to take us aboard their boat, and we're going to learn all about it and how they had survived this as a family. They're still all talking to each other, as you'll see here tonight. And so hop aboard. Let's have a chat about sailing tonight. Stu Holmes, welcome.
Hi, thank you very much.
Thank you. And Lana Holmes, Fransen-Holmes, pardon me.
That's all right.
Welcome as well.
Thank you.
Which one of you was the captain?
You could consider me the skipper of the boat. That's just kind of the way we divided things up many years ago. And when we learned to sail, Lana was tending to toddlers, so it was often easier for me to manage the boat, I guess, at that time.
I think it's really good to have clear roles, and Stu is, I would say you're definitely the captain. And we always say that Stu keeps everyone safe, and my job is to keep everyone happy on the boat.
Aww.
So, and the way we divide things
board.
out, and it works out really well.
It does, because if you have defined roles and you know what your place is or you know what your job is, things just go a lot smoother.
Yeah, it works.
Now, when you're not on the water, what's your day jobs? What do you do, Lana?
So
besides
I'm an
sailing?
occupational therapist, and I work at the hospital in Comox, but I'm mostly, I would say, a stay-at-home mom. I do work a couple days a week, but my main role is looking after the family.
Lovely. And Stu?
I'm an anesthesiologist in the same hospital that Lana works at, in the Comox Valley Hospital, and I've been doing that for 20 years plus.
How wonderful to have all this medical experience aboard when you are doing a transatlantic crossing. So you were, safety first. Clearly, you have the skills to keep your family safe. Yeah. So how long has the Holmes family been sailing? When did you take up this amazing sport? And have your daughters taken to it like ducks to water?
So they've just grown up always knowing about being on a sailboat and being on the water, because we first decided to learn how to sail when I was 6 months pregnant with Aria. So that was back in 2009. We decided we needed a sport that we could do as a family. And we live in the Comox Valley, and it's just a great spot to learn how to sail. So we took a Learn to Cruise course. And then when Aria was born, I think our first time chartering a boat would have been when she was 2 or 3 weeks old.
And we just went from there. We continued sailing for the years. Every summer, we bought a boat, and then we would, sail that for 6 to 8 weeks in the summertime every summer. And we did that pretty much every summer for the last 15 years.
Yeah, we bought one boat, and then when the second child came along, we decided we needed 5 more feet, so then we bought a second boat. And then we just sailed that one until we decided to go on this longer trip.
And how old were your two daughters, Aria and Micha, when you went on this sailing adventure?
So Aria was 12 years old when we left, and she's now 14. And Micha was 8 years old when we left, and she's now 9. So yeah, a lot has changed.
Yeah, and we're actually going to meet them near the closing of the show here. They'll be making a cameo appearance, so our viewers can meet them as well. So
Sure.
Yeah. So what was one of the, in planning this trip and planning the route, let's just take a look at the route that you planned.
Sure. So we didn't have any offshore sailing experience. We had sailed around Vancouver Island, but doing that was an amazing experience, but you anchor every night, so there's really no offshore sailing. So in order to gain offshore experience, I actually hired a skipper who was from the Comox Valley as well. He joined us in Martinique, me and a couple of other friends, and we sailed the boat from west to east to Europe together. This was before the family joined, just so I could get offshore experience, so I could feel capable sailing the boat when they all left, which was an amazing experience. I'm so glad we did that. I gained so much experience and had a great time with our skipper and friends. So when the family did join me in Gibraltar, I felt ready.
And we definitely had a timeline for when Stu needed to purchase the boat, because you have to, or it's recommended that you leave the Caribbean before it was May.
Like before June 1st,
Before
you have to
June
be out of the
1st.
Caribbean because of hurricane season.
Of course, yeah.
So we had this window where Stu was looking for boats, and a few that we looked at just didn't meet our criteria. They wouldn't be ready to cross the Atlantic in that time. So it was getting closer and closer to the date of when he needed to leave. And luckily we found, exactly the boat that we were looking for. and then you prepped the boat and had it ready to do a crossing quite quickly. It doesn't usually happen that fast, but we were lucky enough to find a boat that was ready to cross the Atlantic.
Wow. And we've got some lovely shots of your boat. How do you pronounce her name?
Well, her name is Oyai.
Oyai.
Oyai, which is a very comical story to why it's pronounced Oyai and why it's actually spelled that way, because when we bought it, it was Oya, O-Y-A.
Which is West African for a spirit of the wind.
Oh.
And that was actually a shortened form of the boat's original name, which was Voyageur. But the previous owners had scraped away the letters, so they were left with Oya, and they thought, oh, that looked good.
Yeah.
And so I tried to register the boat as Oya. Stu was already halfway across the Atlantic.
No, I was already in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean when Lana was taking care of the paperwork.
Yeah, I was doing all the paperwork from back home, trying to get it so we could fly the Canadian flag and be registered out of Vancouver. And the name Oya was already taken by some other Canadian boat somewhere in the world.
Yeah.
So I was like, what can I do to make this simple? So I was thinking I could make it Zoya, but I'm like, if I just slap an I on it, that's really easy to cut out of a sticker, and we'll just make it Oyai.
So it's a long story for a name that really doesn't mean anything.
I hope that's not how you named your daughters. Like,
Well, no.
Savannah, I need a letter.
If they're taken, that's okay.
Okay, yeah.
Those names, yeah.
Now, how big is Oya?
She
And how
was
much-
53 feet.
Oh,
So it was a good sized boat, and it was a boat built by ML, which is a French builder. And they're very well-renowned boats. There's actually a few YouTube channels that people who are sailing around the world have these particular boats. And they're just purpose-built for crossing oceans.
Yeah.
They're very safe, they're very comfortable, and they're very predictable, which is the other thing about sailing offshore, because you don't want to be surprised. You want them to take the seas as you would expect them to. You don't want jitteriness, or you don't want to feel unstable or unsafe at any point.
Yeah.
And she was amazing for us.
well, let's take a look, because you sent us some really good bad weather footage here.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Of some really rough Atlantic seas.
Right, so that those seas were when we were crossing from west to east towards the Azores. And so it was myself, the skipper, and two sailing friends who were about as inexperienced as me offshore, but they were amazing people and very solid. And it got to about 40 to 50 knots for a good 24 hours, which built the seas to about 2 to 3 stories. And so when you're in the middle of the ocean in a boat of 53 feet, which sounds big, and the seas are about 3 stories, you feel quite small. And it was intense. But the boat handled it well, the crew handled it well, and after about 36 hours, the seas calmed out again, and we just continued on our way.
And we have another lovely video of one of your better days, a lovely fair weather day out there on the Atlantic. The whole family.
I would say most of the days were lovely days on the
Really?
Atlantic. It was just, our first few days were quite rough when we left the Canary Islands for our crossing. People were seasick, the seas were quite confused, the winds were high, and then it just mellowed out, and we would put up our twin head sails, and it was just, it's not that you forgot that you were sailing, but it was, the motion was comfortable, the weather is warm, you're wearing your shorts and t-shirts, and you're just into a routine of just relaxing.
And the trade winds, you often don't have to touch the sails for sometimes a week.
Wow.
Which is, it's the definition of relaxing sailing. It was lovely.
You had a really good crossing then. Both directions, was it that, those conditions?
Stu, you had more exciting and more exciting
Well, the
crossing.
reason that we planned it that way was because when you're going from, the North America side to the Europe side, it's more unpredictable, it's colder, the winds are often stronger. So that was the time where I wanted to gain that experience with the skipper. But on the way back, it's all trade wind sailing, which is warm, it's predictable, it's lovely sailing. And so the family and I experienced the best part of the sailing.
Yeah.
And I just want to preface this too, that you did a circumnavigation of Vancouver Island first, just to test the waters, how the girls would fare. And we have some lovely shots of that
That was an
circumnavigation.
amazing experience because
That was
Vancouver
2020,
Island-
I think?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was during COVID.
During the height of COVID, during the first summer of COVID, when nobody else was out. There was no Americans because the borders were closed. Nobody was really sailing very much, so we were very much on our own, which was lovely.
Yeah.
And I had my first experience with provisioning too, of thinking, I don't know ever what's going to happen. Like sometimes we might not know with COVID if we could get into a port or if they'd allow us to go into a shop for food. So I had practice of, okay, I'm going to stock the boat with 3 weeks worth of food, just in case something happens and we can't get food, we'll have enough stuff on board. So it was good practice for that as well.
All these factors to consider.
Yeah.
Stu, all in all, how many nautical miles did you cover in the 14 months?
We probably covered about 12 to 13,000 nautical miles, so somewhere around 25,000 kilometers. And that includes when the boat went from the Caribbean over to Europe, and then we did a small little lap of the Mediterranean as far east as Italy. And then we came out again into the Atlantic and then crossed to the Caribbean, and then continued on actually and sailed up to the east coast of the US. And sold the boat right near Washington, D.C.
Oh, so she's gone. She's
gone,
She's
unfortunately.
someone else's adventure right now.
It was a gut-wrenching decision, and it wasn't, because it was a lovely time when we were all spending that 14 months together. But when boats sit, if you're not using them, they start to rot really fast. So I'm glad somebody kind of took her over right away and is maintaining
Someone
her.
else is loving her.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Now, 14 months, you have 2 young daughters. How did the girls fare in terms of schooling? How did they keep in touch?
That was my project, with getting that all set up before we left. And we actually joined a homeschool program called Self-Design, which is based out of BC. And we are connected with a registered teacher from the Comox Valley. And we would have a video call, or at least communication with her once a week.
Wow.
So, and the premise of the school was amazing because it's self-designed. So we guided the girls' learning based on where we were and what we were doing. So if we were in Italy and we went to Rome, we're going to the Colosseum, so we're going to learn about gladiators, and we're going to do learning about that. Or in Barcelona, we went to the chocolate factory and we took a chocolate making class, and then the person there gives a whole tour of the chocolate museum. Or we went and saw the buildings that were the Antoni Gaudi building. So it was really easy to find things to learn about. Even, we used the trade winds to help us cross the Atlantic. Well, why are they called the trade winds? Let's study that. It was just endless opportunities. Another really good one was when we were learning about the coral reefs in the Caribbean. We came upon a scientist who was helping regrow the coral reefs. So we asked if we could have a little chat with her. And then we went and we snorkeled the coral reefs. So we saw how you have to clean them and how they regrow them.
Wow. It's so easy to pick up on things as you travel, to teach or to learn about them. And we were the same. We wanted to learn about all these things. And the girls just had a great experience.
Will you adopt me?
It was so fun.
Of course, yes.
The only thing we had a textbook for was for math.
Okay.
And that was a little bit more structured, but everything else you could fit, whether you're doing science or social studies or your English, it was all fit into self-design.
Wow. And the girls were also charting and plotting as well, learning that as a skill. And that's totally math related.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Or we're looking at the stars.
Yeah, there's a lot going on out there all the time. So there was no shortage of stuff to learn about.
Okay, 14 months together on a small boat. Might be 53 feet, but I'm sure at times it felt like 5.3.
Yeah.
Yes.
How'd you get along?
For the most part, everybody got along really well. There were moments, of course.
Yeah.
We all have our, down times and our up times, and you just have to make it work. Like there are separations in the boat, which there was a back cabin, there was a fore cabin, so you could get away if you needed to. You were just behind a very thin door, but you could get some alone time if you wanted.
Was there a timeout chair?
Should have been.
No, there wasn't enough space for one.
There's lots of things that we plan to do as well. Like we never just would be going somewhere without a thought of what are we going to do and what are we going to see, like whether it's a hike or an activity that we're doing. And when I was thinking about the 19 days that we were crossing, that could have taken us even longer, it could have been shorter, but I had to have thoughts of what are we going to do to keep ourselves busy and active. So we did things like spa day, where I had a bunch of face masks and nail polish and things like that. We had spa day. We had the boat Olympics, which took place over 3 separate days, where we had things like cockpit push-ups and name that tune, paper, rock, scissors, trivia, like just really silly things that would just keep everyone's spirits up. Or it might be, oh, we're going to make bread today, or we're making cookies.
Or the girls would do shifts on watch with one of us. Like Micah, who was 8 at the time, would share a shift to watch out for boats on the radar or on the chart plotter. And Aria would often do shifts by herself on watch for 2 hours at a time.
We've got a shot of her sitting out on one of the cross beams here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Keeping watch.
It was very engaging. For the sailing itself was quite engaging because you're trimming the sails, you're watching for other boats and land and weather, and there's a lot going on. It was great.
I just want to go back to the Bahamas for a second. We have a beautiful shot of, I think it's you, Lana, snorkeling with one of your daughters, and there's a sunken piano and a mermaid.
Yeah.
What?
Beautiful. So we think that was off of a privately owned island by David Copperfield. And there's different apps that you can use that are maintained by other boaters who are cruising. So again, part of my job was finding all the activities to keep people busy. So on one of these apps, I found like, oh, there's a snorkeling spot where you can find a grand piano and a mermaid. And the water there is so crystal clear. Like once we anchored in this spot, we could just drive the dinghy over and you could see it from above.
Oh, wow.
And so we just anchored the dinghy and went snorkeling there. And there was other things that we found too, other underwater sculpture places.
There's an amazing array of things out there that you can dive around and see underwater. There was
An
sunken
airplane.
aircraft, there was sunken cars, there was obviously sunken boats, there was all sorts of good stuff that we saw.
Yeah.
And Stuart, we have a shot of you. I think you're spearfishing.
Oh yeah.
Did you have any luck?
Yeah, we did. I was not very good at it, but I did have some luck because often the fish are so plentiful where we were snorkeling. But we had other friends that we were sailing with who were actually from Quebec, and they were excellent spearfishers, and they were teaching us the ropes of spearfishing. So we caught some lobster, we caught grouper. There was a few other, I think, triggerfish we caught. So we did eat well at certain reefs, and learned how to fish to a certain extent, but we're not fishermen or fisher people. We kind of left that one to the experts.
Yeah, very good. And there's a beautiful shot of, I think it's Micah, taking a cliff dive here. I think this is in the Bahamas.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
There was no shortage of things to do. Because of these apps, they would explain what other boaters had found and what the popular things to do at certain places was. And if you wanted to cliff jump or fish or spearfish or whatever, there was something to do everywhere we went.
What was some of the things that surprised you most about your girls? I mean, being this young and having this type of experience, away from their friends, away from their cell phones.
Yeah, well, that's just it.
I think they're really resilient and adaptable because it wasn't always comfortable on the boat either. I mean, sometimes they were seasick. It was sometimes just uncomfortable with the motion of the boat because you have to think you're on the boat most of the time. Like we're sleeping on the boat as well as, even if we're at anchor, we're still on the boat and it's still moving at anchor.
Right.
So they're always moving, but they just adapted so quickly and when they were feeling uncomfortable, just being able to be okay with that.
Yeah.
They did amazingly well. Like there was never anyone just like losing their mind and not being able to cope. They would just kind of, okay, this is what it's like for now. And we know it will get better, but now I just have to kind of be strong and
And sometimes those times would last 24 or 36 hours. And after they went on that long, people just adapted and became happy again. Like they just reverted to their own personalities. And even though it was weird motion, sometimes to the point of being violent, you would have to hold on or else you'd be thrown across the cabin. They would just kind of adapt, forget about that, and just move on and just.
You must be very proud of them. And just so the viewers know, they're in the studio with us tonight, and they'll be making a cameo appearance near the end, so we'll be able to see the Holmes family together on land.
They're also very helpful too. There's times when Stu and I were busy and we needed to be and we had to call Aria and or Micha in to just do something for us because our hands were tied. And they became very independent.
Well, Aria did independent watches for 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening whenever there was just the four of us doing a crossing. So during the very long crossings, we would get on extra crew to spread the load out. But during the crossings that were kind of 2 to 4 days, it got quite tiring for Lana and I because someone would have to be up 24 hours.
That's right, yeah.
But it was really funny when we crossed to the Canary Islands from Morocco. It was a 4-night passage with just Stu and I. So we were up 24/7, one of us. So by the time we arrived in the Canary Islands, we were quite tired. And I knew the girls wanted to arrive at the marina before Halloween. So we managed to do that. but we had like no Halloween costumes. So Stu and I were sleeping, and the girls, out of the cardboard boxes from the cereal, made their own Halloween costume. So when we woke up from sleeping, they had it all sorted out. You know,
Yeah.
one was an angel, one was a devil. They had everything ready.
Love it.
Perfect.
That's so cool.
Clearly they did it all on their own.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a gorgeous shot in Gibraltar, I guess, where you made the landfall there, of the girls looking out over the view from the top of the Rock of Gibraltar
Yeah.
there.
Gibraltar is unique.
Yeah.
It's the best way to describe it. It's this little bastion of city in the middle of nowhere, and it's lovely, and it has such rich history with the British and the Spanish, and it's just a very interesting part of the world.
Were those Barbary monkeys still all hanging
Yeah.
around
Oh,
there?
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
They steal your food if you're not careful.
Yes, yeah. Now, 14 months away from home. Any medical issues that you had to deal with? Any emergencies?
There was one time where I dropped a very large hatch, so that the engine is under the cockpit of the boat, and the engine hatch weighs about 150 pounds, and so I lifted up to get down to the engine, and once I actually dropped it on my toe, and I almost broke my toe, and so that was a bit of a medical emergency. It was in the middle of a passage. We were on probably a 48-hour passage or something.
Wow.
And it got very angry and very red, and I was limping around, but that was the extent of it, honestly. There wasn't any other big medical issues. We had other friends who needed some medical advice, and I was happy to provide. There was actually a bunch of doctors that we met cruising. I was one of a few, and so if anybody had a medical issue during one of their transports or during one of our passages, they would just call us up on the radio and say, "Hey, what do you think?"
Oh.
And or in an anchorage, they'd say, "Oh, this just happened. Can you come over and have a look?" And yeah, obviously we would go over and help whenever we could.
Fabulous. What about the boat? Did she have any mechanical issues or breakdowns? Or
She did. She was a fairly automated boat, which means that there was a lot of electric motors on board. Like the furler is usually a manual system that furls the sailboat. This one was an electric motor that did that. The winches, again, are usually manual, but this boat had electric winches. So there's a lot of electric motors that needed attention sometimes, and there was one in particular that broke down for a few weeks, and we had to order parts from Switzerland, and they got delivered to us in the Canary Islands. And otherwise, besides the electric motors,
We tore a sail.
Oh, yeah,
We
that's
got
right.
a new mainsail, and then we tore that.
Yeah.
Got it repaired. I mean, there's always little things that are being maintained. And you're always fixing things. Like you're never just sitting back and thinking it's going to be easy.
Right.
You were really good at being on top of any mechanical issues.
We had a good chunk of time before we set out from Gibraltar. I was basically, after arriving in Gibraltar, the family was still back finishing school, and so I had 4 weeks in Gibraltar just to like go from stem to stern in the boat, figure it all out, fix anything that needed fixing, and just really get to learn the boat.
Yeah.
So that 4 weeks before we started that portion of the trip was amazing because I just got to know the boat and put her in a shape that hopefully I wouldn't have to spend all my hours fixing things afterwards.
There's a shot of her in dry dock here. I'm not quite sure. Is she being painted or barnacles taken off? Or?
We painted the bottom when we were in
Okay.
Martinique on our way back from Europe. We had just painted her before we left to Europe, but because of all the miles we put on her, the paint wore off.
Yes.
That's what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
And so we had to repaint her again in Martinique.
We're always checking like all the rigging too, because if you think that you're sailing and going so many thousands of nautical miles, there's a lot of pressure always on all the rigging, all the lines. So that's something that we do regularly is just check to make sure nothing's fraying, nothing's worn through.
Yeah.
What do we need to replace next? Even we have a water maker. So at one point you replace the water maker as well, not the system itself, but
Just the membranes.
The
I mean, there was
membranes.
always stuff to do. And so-
Absolutely.
yeah.
Next time you need red green on your boat as the
Yeah, it
crew.
used to be handyman.
With his
for
duct
sure.
tape, yeah.
It does, yeah.
Wildlife, marine life. Did you see a fair bit in your crossing?
Like in the crossing itself, you'd see the dolphins coming at you from a distance,
Beautiful.
and you knew they could see your boat because they're coming right for you. And then we would all get really excited, and we'd we were always tethered in on the boat
Yeah.
if we step out of the cockpit. So we would tether into a line and then go sit out the front of the boat, and the dolphins would ride our bow wake. And
That was
it's just
magical.
like what you'd see in movies, right? And they're on their sides looking up at you, and
Beautiful.
just
An
amazing.
interesting encounter we had on our first night out of the Canary Islands was it was just getting dusk, and it was quite stormy and quite rough. And one of our crew looked up and said, "What is that?" And it was just right ahead of us. And not 5 seconds later, a sperm whale went right beside us. And it was within probably 20 feet. And I don't think we were going to hit it, but it looked like we
Yeah.
could have.
Wow.
And that could have been
That-
fairly
yeah.
perilous.
There was always flying fish on the deck too. We'd wake up in the morning and there's anywhere from little tiny baby ones to ones about this size, flying fish. We'd
Sea
occasionally
turtles.
not so much in the open ocean
Yeah.
that we'd see those, but closer to shore we would, and we snorkeled with the sea turtles. We occasionally had little birds come onto the boat for a rest. What else did we see?
We saw sharks in the Bahamas, a lot of sharks. So we would go
On
swimming.
the land or?
No, we would actually go in the water and snorkel, believe it or not. Like our friends that I mentioned earlier with the fishing who were teaching us to fish said, "Oh, don't worry about it, it'll be fine. We've swum with these sharks before." And they were about 6 feet long reef sharks. And so we worked up the courage to go snorkeling with the sharks. And I have a very vivid memory of Micah, our 9-year-old, being in the water with me and the shark kind of swimming underneath of us and her climbing on my back and like submerging me underwater. But it was, it was amazing to see them in their natural habitat.
We can't close without talking about the cocoa beans and the love that the girls added to the cocoa beans. Talk to us about that photo.
Well, that was in the Caribbean, in Grenada, and we, again, part of school or part of the adventure was learning about where chocolate comes from. So then we went to an actual cocoa bean plantation, and an interesting food that we didn't even know you could eat was a cocoa bean itself. When you split it open, you can eat the raw fruit on the inside, which was delicious. And then we saw the whole process of then, how they ferment it, how they dry it. So the girls actually got to walk through the beans, because that's how they would turn them, is just by walking through them. And then, of course, it ended with great big bricks of chocolate that we would take with us.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at this point, I just want to bring the girls in. Micah and Aria, come on over and join your parents here so we can take a look at the crew that you had with you. The Holmes family is complete.
That's us, that's all 4 of us.
There you
On a
go.
boat together for 14 months.
Nice. And everyone's still speaking to each other?
Yeah,
Cool.
remarkably so.
Yeah, very good. And what's your next adventure? What have you got in mind?
Well, that's interesting. We had such a huge adventure. We haven't really had time to plan the next one. Yeah, it's going to be something big, but we haven't really decided what it's going to be yet.
I mean,
Very-
Aria is getting ready to go off on an exchange to Germany, so I think she got a bit of a travel bug, maybe, with the sailing trip.
Congratulations. Wow, this is tremendous.
Yeah.
What life experience that you're providing your family. Any closing thoughts? We have to wrap in about 30 seconds here, but anything you want to?
I would just say that if anybody is thinking about doing a sailing sabbatical or taking off and doing offshore sailing, do it. You'll never regret it. It was so amazingly rich.
The girls
and-
agree.
Yeah.
It was amazing. The people that we met so many other people that were just an instant friend group, and it was
Yeah, there's
such a
lots
good
of people out
experience.
there. If you think you're going to be alone, you aren't. There's so many people.
Yeah.
Well, a pleasure to meet all of you, and thank you for sharing your adventures with us. This has been really insightful, and there's just such a nice energy with your family, a real nice warmth, and may that long continue.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much,
Liz.
Elizabeth.
And stay safe and enjoy your next adventures.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us here on Coast to Coast to Coast Connections, and let's see what kind of adventures you can come up with as well. All the best to you, and we'll see you next time on our next episode.